Good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm Shrikala Ramasubban, the AEN site lead this year, co-leading with Ashwini Verma. A very warm welcome to all of you for our first fireside chat in 2020 with Abigail Hing Wen, sponsored by AEN and Adobe and Women. AEN, Asian Employee Network, as it's known, was founded in 2016 and has over 733 members now in San Jose. Our mission is to drive leadership and professional development of Asians and Asian Americans within Adobe, create networking opportunities, and raise awareness and engagement of Asian culture and community. We are very excited to partner with Adobe and Women to co-host today's fireside chat with Abigail Hing Wen. Abigail Hing Wen is an AI expert, venture capital lawyer, a mother of two, and now a published author. Her debut novel, Loveboat, Taipei, was released on January 7 to critical acclaim. It's the Barnes & Noble Young Adult Book Club pick for February 2020, was named by 17 magazine as one of the 7 best young adult books of 2020 so far, and is currently the #1 Amazon new release bestsellers in the teen and young adult romantic comedy category. Abigail Hing Wen will share with us how she managed family and parental expectations to become a writer and the journey she took in writing Loveboat, Taipei. I will hand off to my co-host Jackie Lincoln from Adobe and Women to introduce Byron Hing.
Great. Jackie Lincoln Al Yang, lead of the Adobe and Women San Jose group. We have about 600 members, 52 of which are men. We need allies, so awesome. Great to have literally a diverse membership in particular. So Adobe and Women San Jose, it is the largest population as far as the D&I groups across all of Adobe. So we host intern panels. We are doing a STEM Girls tour this week, for example. We have professional development cohort. We have other speakers come in as well. So a diverse amount of events for our population. So Adobe's own Adobe's own Byron Hing is a member of the legal department here at Adobe. Also Abigail's younger brother, and someone whose earliest memories included being spellbound as he listened to Abigail's stories. So with that, I want to lead off with likely a spellbound event, welcoming both Abigail and Byron to the stage.
So thank you so much. First of all, to the Asian Employee Network and to Adobe and Women, I'm so grateful for just the opportunity to be here with my big sister. I think that introduction was really great because I think some of my earliest memories were just sneaking out during nap time to go into my big sister's room where she told these stories. And I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and she was probably 6 or 7. And it was just fun to be able to listen to these stories, which at the time probably had these great, growth and climaxes and resolutions. And at the time, I remember when it was my turn to tell the stories, it would be like the dog barked, right? And then I'm like, that's my story. And so it's just really great to be a part of, to be here with you and to kind of be able to share this moment with you. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's
really
great to be here.
Your mic's not on. You got to turn it on.
I need to turn it on. No? Yes. All right. Yeah, thank you all for coming. It's great to be here.
Okay. So in terms of that introduction, Abigail, it's pretty amazing to hear how you've done so many different things. You have a lot on your plate. So can you talk a little bit about your personal story and how, you've came to be here and to have a published book?
Sure. So we grew up in Ohio. Our parents are from the Philippines and Indonesia, and our grandparents are from China. So we've been out of China 3 generations and, immigrants for several. As Byron mentioned, I've always loved stories. I didn't know that I could be a writer. I admired many writers, but nobody really looked like me, so it just didn't seem like something that was in the cards. But I did go on to law school. I worked in the government, the Senate Judiciary, and did a clerkship on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. And at that time, I was thinking about becoming a law professor, but I I'd written an article, I'd done the Columbia Law Review, I was an editor, and so everything was like moving in the right direction, but I just couldn't bring myself to write this article that only 5 people were going to read coming from me. And I, at the same time, I had this idea for a fantasy novel in my head. And I really love fantasy. I think, the same things that led me to the law were similar to things that draw me to fantasy, which is that you can imagine a better world. And sometimes, fantasy can be dystopian, it can be utopian, but you can think about different societies and what works and what doesn't work. And it gives you a little bit of distance to critique the world that you live in, through this like fictional lens. So my husband was super encouraging. I was at Sullivan and Cromwell at the time as a young lawyer. And then I went on maternity leave, and he said, instead of writing this article that you don't want to write, why don't you write this novel that's in your head? So I tried it, and I loved it. And I think that's when I realized, wow, this is something I'm good at it. I really love it. I need to get better though. And I sent it out to the world, got rejected, wrote another novel, got rejected, and started, finding ways to improve my craft. And along the way, I did go back to law. I took 3 years off with my kids, moved to California here for my husband's job, and then just stayed under the radar for 3 years, writing the novel, raising the kids, and then went back to a law firm. So I would say that the biggest decision for me was leaving the law firm, actually, and then going in-house to Intel Capital, where I was a lawyer for our investments, and eventually moved into AI investments as well. And I think that was such a hard decision at the time, because I felt like, I'd been on this fast track and like a really intense track for so long as a corporate lawyer at a law firm. But it really gave me the space I needed to write the books that I wanted to write, and to spend the time with the kids that I wanted to. And I think that really was critical. It turned out that I loved going in-house. I loved being closer to the business and seeing the new startups and the new technologies, and then having a team that really had my back. And I brought home no emotional stress. Like, it was just really a fun job, and I had a lot of capacity for the book writing. So that's where I am now.
That's great. And can you talk a little bit about parental expectations and kind of how that managed into everything? I know, our parents, mom and dad, are probably fairly stereotypical Asian parents in a lot of ways. They're very, they told us that one of us had to be a doctor, one of us had to be a lawyer, and one of us had to be an accountant. And, that didn't really work out. It worked out for one of them, but not of the other two. They didn't get an accountant or a doctor. So can you talk a little bit about kind of that difficulty in kind of managing parents and what that meant for you?
Right. So for many years, I didn't tell them. I kept it a secret. I instinctively, I think I knew that, they were immigrant parents. They'd come here for practical reasons. They were very practical. I think one time I mentioned to my mom when I was little that I wanted to be either a farmer's wife, like Laura Ingalls, or a painter, and she shut those down right away. Like no, we're not even going there.
Yeah, I said I wanted to be a garbage man.
It's a really, it's important professions, right? But I think, coming as immigrants, we didn't really see the diversity of jobs that were available in the United States. And so sometimes I think that's why you end up with these narrower bands of job opportunities. So I did keep the writing a secret for a long time. It wasn't something practical, but also, just writing itself is such a personal, intimate thing. And, I find whenever I do share about the writing, sometimes people share back, they have a secret passion that they're also pursuing and that they haven't told anyone about either. And so, I think it's sometimes maybe we should share more so that we can find that support. But not telling my parents for a long time, I think they slowly started to find out as I wrote more and more books. I think somebody in our family outed me. I'm not sure who, but one day...
I plead the fifth.
One day my parents came to me and said, "Are you writing a book?" And I remember just feeling all this imposter syndrome, descending on me. I'm like, no, that's not a big deal. I played it down. And I don't know if I was in my MFA program at the time, but MFAs, they're pretty expensive. I'd saved up money at the law firm, but I still felt really guilty spending this money on this program to learn how to write. And one of my classmates put it as spending a lot of money to chase Bigfoot, right? Because you just don't know what's going to happen with this. But I think what kept me going there is just encouragement to invest in yourself and in your dreams. And I think as a mom, I actually hear that a lot. I hear other women saying it's really important to take time off to invest in yourself and your dreams, and whether that's taking classes or other things outside of your work and your family. So Eventually, I think it really wasn't until I got the book deal that I fully felt comfortable in coming clean. But along the way, I did get little points of encouragement from the family. Like I remember my mom picked me up from from the airport when I came back from my program, and she's like, "Oh, you shouldn't spend so much money." And she didn't even know how much the tuition was. She just knew I was flying to do some writing stuff. And so I remember feeling bad about that. But then a week later, she says to me, "I told my dad that I would one day write a story about our family. Maybe you'll write it." And I had no idea that she actually had those dreams in her too. And so that was really a kind of an eye-opening moment. And I said, "No, of course you should write it." So I think when the book deal came out, it was time to tell them. And I actually printed out my novel. It wasn't bound yet, and I redacted the intimate scenes since my dad always changed the channels on the kissing scenes when we were growing up. And so I redacted the scenes. I gave him the copy, and I did let him know that there were some pages missing. And that was a scary moment too, because this is a book about a girl with big dreams, and there's romance, and there's lots of crazy stuff. And I don't know how much of myself I was giving away, but he read it in a few days. I gave him a practical reason to read it. I said, "Can you check the Mandarin?" And he did that for me. But I'm so grateful that we're having this open conversation now with my parents, and they've been super incredibly supportive of the book. And I'm just glad that we're able to be here at this point.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've actually been telling a lot of people as I've talked to them about your book is, we have historically, none of us have historically seen eye to eye. When I say us, I mean you, me, and Colleen, who's our younger sister.
We're ABC.
Yeah. And, but one of the things that's pretty crazy is, I don't think you have ever seen eye to eye with mom or dad in probably since you were a little girl.
Mm-hmm.
And, the butting of heads and kind of the different disagreements are real. It's all in love, but it's still hard. And I think you've really come together in a really powerful way through this process as mom and dad have really supported your book. And I think that's just been really fabulous. So.
Right. And, it's a book about a girl navigating her relationship with her parents. Like I can maybe back up a bit on what the story is about. There's a program in Taiwan, it's a real program that's been around since the 1960s. And parents have been sending their kids there to learn language and culture and to find a spouse. And, I actually went on the program as a presidential scholar. The Taiwanese government went through a list of all the major scholarships, so the Pres Scholars, Koch Scholars, Westinghouse. I heard that Miss Chinatown was also tapped for the program. And I show up, and I thought I was there for language and culture, and then lo and behold, it's actually this huge, crazy party all summer, and a great time. But, my character, Ever, is, similarly a second-generation immigrant struggling with pursuing her dreams, but wanting to honor her parents. And the journey is an opportunity for her to both connect with her culture and her parents in a new way, and then really find the strength to figure out what her life should be. Yeah. So yeah, and I think sharing that story with my family, my parents, has kind of brought it full circle for me too.
Yeah, I mean, mom and dad are clear, pretty activist type people. They've been super involved in Asian American political organizations their whole lives. And I think that's probably played a huge role in this, and I'm actually curious what your thoughts are on that. I think Asian Americans historically, I think we're around 5.6% of the population today, which is up fairly significantly since we were children, but it's still, we do tend to gravitate into certain industries like the tech field. I think if you look at Adobe, I think, and the tech industry, I think I've read somewhere that we're about 25 to 30% of all tech workers in Silicon Valley, which is obviously largely, overrepresented in terms of relative to the population. But that necessarily means if we're overrepresented in certain industries that we're underrepresented in a lot of other industries, many of which have kind of cultural impact, like the media. And then when we have appeared in the media, we tended to be in roles that were very stereotypical, right? I think a lot about like 17 Candles. I think a lot about The Karate Kid or Bruce Lee or something to that effect. The number of people that came to me as a young boy growing up in Ohio saying, "Do you know Kung Fu?" and going, "Yeah," or something to that effect. It was, which we laugh now, but it was really,
very painful.
It was very, very painful at the time, right? And so, I think in recent years that we've seen kind of a shift, and I'm curious what your views are on that, because you've seen like Crazy Rich Asians do really well. We've seen Awkwafina kind of win the Golden Globes, and so I'm just curious what you think is happening in the media industry now. And I think your book also obviously kind of plays into that that change. And so what are your views on kind of the business of Asian Americans in media?
Right. No, these are really thoughtful, great questions. I definitely feel like I'm part of a movement. Things are changing. 15 years ago, there was a story in the publishing industry about a Chinese American author who was told, "We'll publish your book, but you have to change your Chinese American boy character to a white boy character before we can do it." And she said it was like taking a spoon to her heart, but she wanted to publish. It's super hard to get these book deals, and she did it. I thought, like, wow, look how far we've come. Like, now we do have books where there's main characters that are Asian American, and like you mentioned, like Crazy Rich Asians and The Farewell. But I actually just found out 2 years ago there was there's a writer who signed a film option, and her contract actually says that the film producers have the right to change her Chinese American girl main character to a Caucasian girl character in case they need it for marketing reasons. So I think we're not there yet, but we're taking steps in the right direction. I think the key is just really showing that there's a demand for these diverse stories, and that's really what I'm experiencing now. Like, as I go on tour, I'm hearing from so many people, and like just everything that's going on in social media. Wow, there's so much hunger for representation. So much hunger to see that your stories are story-worthy, that they belong on the screen, that they belong in the headlines just as much as anyone else's stories. And I want us to get there. So this book I wrote in part to challenge some of these stereotypes. So there's a cast of over 30 diverse Asian American characters, and they are from all walks of life. Some of them are interested in going into politics, like we talked about growing up. Some of them are, my main character is a dancer, but she's going to med school. There's people in fashion, people in tech, and people with all sorts of interests. And I wanted to showcase that diversity within the community. And of course, it goes even beyond these 30. So my hope is that we'll see these 30 on the screen, and just to showcase, like, this is just the truth of who we are, and see those characters go on to be discovered into other roles in Hollywood that are not necessarily ethnic specific, but Asian Americans can play leading men roles and leading women roles, and be doctors, and as well as as other professions, be artists.
Yeah, so I mean, as I think about this book and the diversity of characters, I mean, I'm going to be honest, I think it's a coming of age story of a young girl. And so I'm probably not the target audience for it, but I really enjoyed the book nonetheless, because I really saw a lot of these, these struggles that a lot of the characters were going through, especially the male characters, because I do relate with the males probably more than the boy-obsessed females. But I do want to say that, I noticed that a lot of the male identifying characters in the book struggled with kind of their masculinity and kind of what it meant to be male and Asian American at the same time, or Asian at the same time. And I just wanted to ask why you chose to explore those types of issues.
Right. So I think it's always painful for me whenever someone feels unattractive because of the way they look, or because the way they look doesn't fit the norms of beauty. So for me, growing up in Ohio, I definitely felt like I thought I was ugly, because nobody would. That was a time when there's not as much interracial dating, and so I would hear people talking about that, like, I'm just not attracted to people of other races, and not really appreciating, like, I come from. The reason I look different than everyone else in Ohio is that my parents came from another country. Like, I think when you're young, you don't really understand that full context. Like, I definitely really internalized that. So and then growing up, like, I've had many conversations with Asian American men over the years about the representation in Hollywood and the media, and how it's not representative of who guys are. And so this question has come up on tour, and my answer is, like, I have really awesome guys in my family. I have really awesome guy friends, and, like, for some reason we don't see them on the screen. So that's part of this. I think it just, again, reflects the reality. Like, I think there's a group of guys in this book they first dubbed themselves the Angry Asian Men, then they eventually become the Gang of Five, and they slowly take back their own stereotypes over the course of the book. And one of those stereotypes is just being, like, some of them struggle with feeling like they're considered effeminate, when, really they can just be who they are, and however they look. And, I think I wanted to showcase, again, even that diversity among Asian American men.
That's great. And so now that I have you on stage, I do want to ask, were any of the stories of these Asian American men based on, people in your life, say your brother?
Interesting. So I would say like all the characters are fictional and any resemblance to real people is purely coincidental. But as I said, I think I have awesome guys in my family, right, who definitely are not stereotypical guys. And you, I think, are an example of like, you're just have always been very confident and, super tall. And like, how tall is this boy? He's
Hey,
like,
my work colleagues are here, so I don't know if you want to talk about this.
yeah, I think I'm like 12 inches or 13 inches shorter than my brother. And, but also like very confident, but also very sensitive, right? So I'll embarrass you back. Like, there's a story, like when we were little, he had this piggy bank and it was really a pig. Like it was like a little pig in overalls and it was made of ceramic, and he had it on a shelf. And one day, I don't know, we were playing and it somehow got thrown down the stairs and the head broke off. And he just cried and cried, and he said he was just like my own son. It's like super sensitive guy, even though he's got this like big guy exterior. And so, I think for sure I just wanted to show like and my guys in my book too. There's some that are more sensitive than others, but again, this is the range of guys and how awesome they are.
So can you talk a little bit about, as we explore all these themes, like when you started writing this book, did you think, oh, there's all these themes that I want to explore and all these things that I want to do, so how can I write a book to meet these themes? Or I'm really curious about the writing process and how you go from, having all these thoughts in your head to kind of putting it into a coherent book that explores, so many themes.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think every book is different for sure. For this one in particular, I knew I wanted to write about the Loveboat experience, and so I spent a lot of time thinking and distilling down what is the essence of a program like Loveboat? What does it mean to the characters that are going to need to take this journey? So my husband also went on Loveboat. He was a couple years before me, and we would just have these conversations. And really what we came down to initially, it's really about discovering your identity in all its facets. And that's not just identity being between cultures, which is true for the book, but also what it means, again, to pursue her dreams, but honor her parents. And so I realized the characters that need to go on this journey, like, they're going to go and they're going to get dropped off in a foreign land of a country that's connected to their roots, and they're also going to rebel. So that's actually the other big secret about Loveboat is, zero supervision. These kids who've been studying hard their whole lives suddenly get dropped off together, and it's a crazy party. And so like, what kind of kid needs to go and have this rebellious experience? So she is in a family that's pretty strict, lots of rules around her life, lots of, she feels like she's in a cage. And so I think that I would say is more theme focused and theme directed than some of my other works that I've worked on that are maybe more plot centered. I usually come in with a high concept, but this one in particular, I think I knew when I would write. It just took me a really long time to figure out who the characters were. So I ended up writing the whole book from 4 different points of view, which ended up forming the 4 main characters of the book. And that helped me to really explore. And I realized that every character is struggling with similar issues, but in different ways. And eventually I had to rewrite the whole book because it was not long enough for four different points of view. And I rewrote it all from first person present tense. So Ever Wong ends up being the narrator. I actually do hope that boys will read it, enjoy it too, because I think, I have a number of guy characters. I know there's the girl narrator, but I hope the themes are universal. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I read it, and it was a very good book.
You read it very fast.
Yes. I think I read it in a day, which I don't have time to read a book in a day, but I did. And it was one of those that I just couldn't put down. So, I mean, I think it was a very enjoyable genre, and I was surprised at how much I liked it, actually. It's a great book. So I do also want to ask, you did mention prior works. So can you talk a little bit about, the other works that you've done and how you choose to invest? I don't know how long it would take to write one of these, but
yeah, this is 3 years, and I'm working on a sequel now, actually, that follows that continues the character story. It's a standalone, so it comes to closure. But people wanted to know what happened to one of the characters in particular that they all fell in love with, which is great. But my other books, my first one was a middle grade fantasy. Second one was a contemporary about the Uyghurs of China. The third was a Silicon Valley story, and then the fourth one was a Silicon Valley magical realism story about artificial intelligence and venture capital. So it draws on my interest in those areas, and I think I was actually interested in those areas before I moved into the profession itself. So part of it is I think I just had a steep learning curve in figuring out how to write a novel, and then part of it I think is timing. Like 2 of my novels got through, they were read overnight by editors, but their marketing teams didn't know how they were going to market the book. And this was before Crazy Rich Asians. So I think, hopefully I'm in a different time now, and I'm definitely wanting to pull those books out and seeing if we can, bring them back out again.
And so how do you decide how to invest your time in terms of, trying to start another book, trying to get something off the shelf that maybe didn't get published or something to that effect?
Right.
How do you kind of, you work full time, you have 2 children. I don't know how you actually have time to write at all, but how do you figure out, I have these 2 hours of time on this day, to figure out this is what I'm going to be doing?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. I think it's getting harder now with the book coming out, and my next book is due to my publisher in October. So it's really fast. I don't know. I'm definitely wrestling with it. I had people saying, "Oh, you got to quit your job because the book deal is huge." It's one of HarperCollins' largest acquisitions for the past few years, and this is after 12 years of rejection. So it's I'm thrilled, but I also really love the AI work that I'm doing. So I'm kind of hanging on to that. I think maybe if I could drop down to like a part-time schedule for that work, and then have some space for the writing, I may do that. My manager has been amazing. Like, I really have no reason to quit. Like he said, as far as he's concerned, I'm off till I come back from tour. So I'll be back, and then we'll talk then, I guess.
Hopefully you're not getting yourself into trouble by saying this.
I'm taking my vacation. It's PTO.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit more about the kind of the book as well, and just maybe send kind of the main characters and maybe to give a brief synopsis for those in the room?
Right. Yeah, so as I mentioned, Ever Wong is a dancer who has gotten into one of these 7-year med school programs. So she's facing a future of a really rigorous, amazing education, but really secretly longs to dance. Rick Wu is the child prodigy bane of her existence. He's going to Yale. She grew up her whole life reading about this kid in the World Journal, which is kind of a well-known journal in the Asian American community, and having her parents compare her to this guy. So he's like, she runs into him on Loveboat, and she's like, oh my God, I have to spend the whole summer with this guy. And then her roommate Sophie is boy crazy, and it turns out there's more to that than meets the eye. And then there's Xavier, who is an artist and a player, and also has more to him than meets the eye. So it's like when these 4 get together, I felt like, knowing the characters as well as I do now, they kind of just do their own thing. I put them in a situation together, and they kind of are off to the races. So
So when writing this book, how much were you drawing from personal experience versus, kind of doing research and talking to other people who may have been on Loveboat, and then trying to get a diversity of experiences from within Loveboat as well?
Right. So I know there's some Loveboat alumni here, and it's been really fun to meet alum as I go through the tour. I would say the internal journeys are mine. And, I do dance myself. I danced at ballet and dance squad and show choir growing up. And so that part of Ever is from me. But I think the external journeys are, it's all dramatized. There are certain trope experience on Loveboat. So sneaking out clubbing, snake blood sake, beer gardens, glamour shots. I took some. I'm not showing them to you. Like all those were kind of quintessential Loveboat experiences. And so I've incorporated those in there. And it was important for me to kind of just share those crazy things. And then there's a tour around the island, so it's there as well. But all of them, I think I just kind of changed and made my own, really. There's like a talent show at the end, and one of the things that my character says, there's never been a talent show like this at Loveboat, and that's true, because it's like this crazy talent show. But what I wanted to do there was showcase, I've read so many books about Asian American characters and or even like with honors, where they kind of turn their backs. In turning their backs on their parents and the way they were raised, they turn their backs on their education, and they just throw everything away. And that always bothered me. And I really wanted these kids to celebrate their talents, because I feel like that's what's happened with us. Wow, we had these amazing educational opportunities, and really just well raised, and we've been able to draw on that and do really incredible things with our careers. And so these kids at the end, they make fun of being themselves or being prodigies for a while, but then then they put on this amazing show that does really reflect the strengths that they bring with them as Asian American kids in a wave of immigration that would only allow certain highly educated Asians to come.
And so what would you, for those who are going to read the book, without spoiling anything, I do want to ask, like, what would you want people to take away from it? And what would you want to say after they put it down and say, not only was this a very entertaining story, but,
Yeah. So I think two things. One is the diversity of the characters. Like, wow, there's a really broad spectrum of Asian Americans, and there's more beyond this book. And two is just a feeling, I think, of hope that really you can be anyone you want to be, and whether that's you fulfill a stereotype or you are breaking out of a stereotype, but we can do all of it, and explore and be yourself.
Great. And so, being at Adobe, where a lot of people kind of took a traditional, one of the okay paths by a lot of stereotypical Asian American parents, there might be some people in the room who, harbor additional secret desires, hidden desires that maybe they didn't want to work in tech, maybe they wanted to work in something else, but for some reason, due to parental pressure or something else, they decided to kind of go down the path of doing something that was more secure, something that was more hot in terms of an economic perspective, and provides some sort of stability from a family perspective. I mean, so clearly you probably went down that path as well in terms of security by going to law school. But what would you say to those people who are kind of thinking, I'm working at Adobe, it's a great place, but there's this part of me that really wants to go and explore the world or live my dream.
Right. It's a really hard question. I think it's very personal and individual to each person. My character, I think, encounters this choice earlier than I did. If I had published a book 10 years ago when I first started writing, I think my life would be really different today. But, and again, like when people are saying you should quit your job, I thought that's what the end path would be. But now I'm finding like I have this really big career in tech, and I have a really big career that's in the writing world. And so I'm looking for ways that I can bring the two together. I'm thinking about like artificial intelligence and storytelling. I'm working on the film side of things now and learning more about how that process works. And so now I feel like I just have a lot more to draw on that I didn't know I was going to have. So I don't know, actually. I don't know the answer to that question. But I think if you have passion for something, definitely find ways to pursue it, carve out time for it. I remember people telling me you should hire childcare. That seemed really weird to hire, again, spending money for a hobby, but it mattered. Like, take it seriously and see what you can do with it. What about you? I mean, what would you say to people? Because you've made on the surface, maybe you've made some traditional choices, but I think like underlying that, you also have a number of interests. What would you tell people?
I have nothing to add on that. I mean, it's just good luck. I mean, I think Adobe is just a great company. I mean, and I think one of the great things about Adobe is it's just it allows you to be creative, and the company really encourages us. And I don't want to sell Adobe. I mean, everyone here is an Adobe employee, so they don't necessarily need to hear it. But I mean, in terms of like the board benefits that allows you to serve on nonprofit boards, the opportunities to do matching grants, and the opportunity to do all sorts of benefits that our human resources department provides us is just fabulous, and it allows you to kind of live a lot of those dreams. I mean, the board matching grant by itself, and this is a total plug to this thing, but they're essentially allowing you to serve on any board that you want, right? Because pretty much any nonprofit board has some sort of minimum fundraising commitment, and to be able to pay that for you means it's like, we really want you to explore what you want to explore, right? And I think that's just an amazing benefit that Adobe offers, and frankly, that's one of the reasons why, I love it so much here. It's the opportunity where they really encourage you to kind of do other things, right? And I think that we always talk about, having a story to tell, and I think it is a creative company to its core, which, unlike a lot of other tech companies, they're creative in other ways, but I think it's creative in a way that I think most tech companies aren't, and I think it's just a fabulous place, and I mean that genuinely, which is not just because I'm on stage in front of other Adobe employees.
No, you said it over the years too. Yeah, I know you really enjoy it here.
So it's a great place. But we did want to open it up for a few questions in case anybody had any. Is there anybody that wanted to talk to Abigail?
Yeah, right here.
Wait for the mic.
I am Nan. My daughter really loves reading and writing. She's third grade, and she loves all kinds of books, fictions, non-fictions, everything. but my husband thought reading novels or comics are not good. So what are the benefits of reading novels or even comics, and what are the types of books you suggest to read for a girl like that?
Right. No, great question. So everyone heard the question, like what are the benefits of reading fiction and stories? I think there's a lot of benefits. One is that you experience a lot, right? I think the difference between fiction and nonfiction. Nonfiction is it tells you the world. Fiction, I think you're experiencing it for yourself. So I think it's a safe place for a young person to try out many different scenarios and personalities and environments and lessons learned by characters without actually having to do it themselves. And there's a lot of knowledge and information that you absorb through osmosis just by reading the books. Obviously helps with language and other things. But I think the other big thing about fiction actually is that it teaches emotional intelligence. Fiction is all about the characters and the character choices that they're making, and you get into the heads of them and understand like how they're making choices and why. And I think I saw an article maybe a year or two ago in New York Times about why more people do need to read fiction for that reason, and especially in the tech world. Like having that EQ is so critical to moving into leadership.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I just had a question on. I'm also a lawyer, and I've been writing a book, but I wanted to ask you on like, how do you kind of balance on not being like kind of stigmatized, or like you want to be taken seriously as a lawyer, and the things you might be writing are pretty personal, especially if you kind of fall towards like romance novels or something like that.
Right.
How do you kind of balance that and like be okay with people knowing that about you?
I definitely wrestled with this because I think when I first started, I remember going to a party and mentioning it was a legal party, and mentioning the book to someone, and they kind of vanished after that. But I've been really encouraged along the way. So the first time I really started writing was I was clerking on the DC circuit with like about as serious a lawyer as you can come, and I went out to lunch with two girls, and we all were talking about writing novels. And so that I think was the first example. And then I was at Columbia Law School where the dean gave a talk at graduation saying that the author Freddy Krueger actually came out of Columbia Law School. So I think having those examples showed me like, okay, this is possible. But I definitely was a little bit nervous. And initially my earlier books were more serious. They were not as like focused on the rom-com, and I would have agents be like, we need to crank up the heat, right? And so I was like, but I'm a lawyer, and and I think even now I'm wrestling a bit like, oh, am I this like lawyer, or am I this like it's almost like you're this like symbol or like this artist, and I think even now I'm still wrestling with those two identities a bit. But I think what I'm finding is people are really excited about the book and the deal, and actually, it's the girls that I've talked to that are more insecure about it. Like, well, maybe you shouldn't tell people that you wrote a romantic comedy. But the guys are like secretly writing books themselves, and they're like, this is so cool that you got a book deal, and they've been really incredibly supportive. So I think in some ways maybe I was more insecure than I needed to be about it. And I would say the third piece of it is, one of the reasons why I didn't leave my job after all is I'm talking about women's leadership, and I'm like, well, I don't want to leave my job as a woman leader to and not have that as part of my life, at least right now. And I want to talk about different models of leadership. So, I have like awesome guys in my life who are great leaders, and they love fantasy football, and they go race their cars and go fishing, and that's great, and girls do that too. But, I, as a female leader, wrote a romantic comedy novel that is doing great right now in the world, which is exciting, right? And so I want to showcase, like, look, there's just different ways of being a leader.
So just a question for me. So what kind of skill sets you need in order to be able to write a book? Does it need inherent talent, or you can build some skill sets and able to write your thought process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as a lawyer, I definitely learned the discipline of writing from my judge. So she would write an opinion, she'd write version 1, I'd write version 2 on top of her, she wrote version 3 on top of mine. We'd go back and forth, and sometimes we'd go up to like 20, 25 drafts. And I learned that editorial process from her, very rigorous. approach. But I had to unlearn the overwriting that happens in law. Not necessarily that we were overwriting opinions, but just in contracts, like you want to be very precise. I think technical writing is very similar. But with fiction, there is an economy of language that's really important. You need to make your point very quickly and succinctly. And so I had to really work towards that. And then the other key, I think, is the being able to make the emotional points. Like that's actually more important. That's what stays with your reader. And it took me a while to learn that, because I think when I was just writing nonfiction, it's just really about getting the facts and the information out. But with this, like, you need to create scenes that stay with people, that are evocative, that draw them in so that they forget they're reading a book. And so that, I think, is the biggest challenge in fiction writing. Whether you are born with it or need to grow, I don't know. But I think if someone has a passion for it, they should just try and get as much input into the writing as possible and learn and grow the craft.
Hi, I'm Gail. I'm in the legal team. So you mentioned that you are doing something in movies. Has this been optioned for a movie, or what's that about?
So nothing's been announced.
Okay.
But I think the hope is, but even without that, I'll tell you, my film manager early on said, you can't celebrate until you're in the car driving to the premiere. And there's so many ways to stop a movie in Hollywood. I've met with so many producers now, and they'll tell me they'll make 10% of the projects that they acquire. So I think the hope is that the book has to do really well in order to really show that there's a market for stories like this. But yeah, it's been exciting. I've definitely had really amazing conversations in Hollywood over the past couple months.
That's exciting.
So I think we have time for one more question. There's a hand in the back.
I'm May. I used to be in legal team. I'm in security now. So I'm wondering, how old are your children, and are they reading your books, and how are they receiving it?
So I have a 17-year-old who just applied to college and a 12-year-old. And they are both AI programmers, and they also have an artistic side. So my older one is writing a novel, and my younger one is a composer at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. So I'm super proud of them. I love that they have both this, technical side and the creative side, and I hope that this is giving them some freedom to pursue that. They've been really supportive. My son's friend is apparently reading in my book right now. So that's really surreal. And I'll probably speak at their school at some point. And then my younger one has read it multiple times. And I redacted it for him, but he actually read it recently unredacted. So I was like, all right, he's 12, almost 13. That's the age range that Harper picked it at. So, but yeah, they've been really great.
Awesome. So I want to thank Abigail and Byron enormously. I'm not only spellbound, I'm just amazed by this incredibly accomplished yet talented woman in front of us. Wow. Thanks for coming here. For folks in the audience, we have refreshments and beverages here, and Abigail and Byron are graciously here for another half hour or so to have a social hour, so please come up and interact. If you had other questions that you weren't able to answer, you can ask directly. So let's give a huge round of applause to Abigail and Byron.
Thank you again for having me and for coming.